Here now we have CNBC contributors Jared Bernstein of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, formerly with Joe Biden's office. We have Jimmy Pethokoukis, Reuters Breaking Views Money and Politics columnist. Also, we welcome California Republican Congressman Ed Royce. He's a member of the House Financial Services Committee and former Clinton White House official. We welcome back my pal David Goodfriend. Let me begin with Mr. Ed Royce. Congressman, I think that Tim Geithner is a very nice guy, personable guy. I think he's basically a good man. But I want to pose this to you. From the very beginning, when the flap emerged that he did not pay his taxes on time from his IMF service and elsewhere, I think, Ed, he lost stature, he lost a lot of influence, he lost independence with the White House, and he never recovered. What's your feeling?
Cutting out.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think a second factor is the fact that, frankly, these plans have not borne out. I mean, we have 9.1% unemployment. You have a massive deficit after the spending. The stimulus bill has gone through. And so with a failed stimulus plan, with 9.1% unemployment, and without the ability for him to articulate to the president the need to cut spending, especially on entitlements, I think we really don't have much we can say about in the way of success for the Treasury Secretary.
And David Goodfriend, even with the debt ceiling debate, which is hot and heavy in Washington, apparently President Obama rejected a call by Senator McConnell and Republicans to come visit the GOP up on the Hill. Mr. Geithner really was wrong on this. Now, he was following White House orders, as he always does. They wanted a clean debt ceiling increase bill. There was no way they're going to get that. The whole battle is over spending and reduced borrowing. I mean, that's an example where Geithner really had no influence. He kept talking about a clean bill. Nobody paid him any attention, David.
Well, listen, I have to say to the congressman, look, I've never been elected to dog catcher, so I have to respect you as a public office holder, but I could not disagree with you more than when you say that somehow the Treasury Secretary's tenure is a failure. It's hard to prove a negative, right? It's very hard to say where would we be had we not taken draconian action when the entire financial system collapsed. But I do know this. I know that stocks are higher than they were. I know that banks are lending more than they were. I know that business is better than it was. We're not losing 700,000 jobs a month the way we were when Geithner came into office. So what are you comparing him to? I compare him to what he walked into versus where he's walking out from. You have to compare to, is the country better off today if he's walking out the door than when he walked in? I think it's an unequivocal yes. Now, Larry,
but you've got a much higher unemployment rate than you had when he came in. You've got a much higher deficit. The deficit is triple what it was when President Obama came into the office.
And why
You've
is
not
that,
had the resistance of that from this Treasury Secretary.
Larry's point
on Tim Geithner.
Larry's point. You asked me a question. I'm going to answer your question, Larry. Does Geithner have the influence within the administration? You say he wanted a clean bill. Look. The vast majority of American people tend to agree with Geithner. They want America to pay its bills.
I don't think so. That's not what the polls say. David Goodfriend, you are dead wrong.
That is what the polls say.
You are dead wrong about that.
How was the question framed, Larry?
We just ran a CNBC All-American poll that showed exactly that you were wrong. In fact, Jimmy Pethokoukis, let me go to you. What people want is substantial reduction in spending and deficits, Jimmy P., and they don't seem to care about the debt ceiling. And my point about Mr. Geithner, again, with personal respect to the guy, I happen to like the guy very much. But he didn't exercise any influence on this process. He wanted a clean bill, which Jimmy was dead on arrival from the very beginning. So I ask you, how effective was Geithner in this debate?
Well, listen, I think overall, I mean, he was brought into his administration to be a bank fixer, a crisis manager, and for instance, his pushing for the stress test, I think was great. But his influence beyond the banks, I think was minimal. Listen, he tried to push the president to come up with some sort of a debt reduction plan after his budget earlier this year was terrible. The president came up with this wacky speech where he's going to cut money over 12 years, not 10, which was completely panned. So he showed no influence there. And getting to the point with the debt ceiling, if he had more stature and he would have come out and really made the strong case, let's say like a Rubin would have done during the Clinton years, it would have had a much more sway. When he did it, it didn't work.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Larry, a couple things. First of all, if you're going to judge Tim Geithner on this following metric, is the debt ceiling bill clean or not, then you're missing what's going to probably be about 4 years of a very important Treasury term. A Treasury Secretary who has and had, if he's really leaving, the ear of a president during the worst financial crisis of any of our lifetimes. Now, who in this panel thought that this crisis could have been solved the way it did for so far less in terms of the cost than Congress, Republican Congress, initially $700 billion. So
Jared,
I think on the TARP record, on the record of the TARP, you know, Jimmy just said, yeah, maybe the banks. That's a huge part of the economy. Well, no, and I can tell you that the president had his...
Well, first of all, the $700 billion TARP came, regrettably, in my humble opinion, under the Bush administration. But again...
Yeah, but it's not a $700 billion price tag. That's my point.
Here's another cost. Here's another cost that has to be figured in here.
Go ahead.
The interest on the debt is $200 billion. In 2 years, it's going to be $400, then $600, then $800. 10 years out, $1 trillion. He is the Treasury Secretary. He should be working with the President on a plan to not just ratchet up spending, but have a long-term plan and a plan for dealing with entitlements that brings that spending back down again. They only ratchet to the left. They'd never bring it down.
Yeah.
And we have not heard him.
I'll speak to that. President Obama spoke to the nation in April and offered a plan that cuts spending by $2 trillion. President Obama has a budget that brings non-security discretionary spending down to levels of the Eisenhower years. This secretary, this president have consistently walked the walk and talked the talk. If you want to distort that career, go ahead.
Yeah, we're not distorting that. I'm being quite frank with you. That is his budget. That is why the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, says that that budget is unsustainable. And under that budget, these trillion-plus deficits are as far as the eye can see.
You know, that budget... hang on a second. I want to go to Jimmy P. because I want to use... Look, I understand where Jared is coming from. He's fresh out of the White House. But the reality is that budget speech that was done in the spring was not taken seriously. In fact, Jimmy, it wasn't even priced out by the Congressional Budget Office because they never put any specifics into it. And in some sense, I do blame Tim Geithner because I don't think he had the pull to get the spending relief he often talked about, or, Jimmy, the business tax reform. When I interviewed him a couple of summers ago, he was all gung-ho for business tax reform. Slash the rates and get rid of the deductions. 2 years later, nothing has happened. I think it's because the White House couldn't care less, Jimmy. And that's why I say that Tim Geithner... Let me finish.
The question was addressed to me. Two issues.
Tim Geithner, for all of his good intentions, was somewhat ineffectual, Jim Pethokoukis. That's what I'm saying.
Listen, two issues, Rob. You had the deficit. He had to push. I mean, for that administration, he was what passed as a deficit hawk, and he pushed it. All he got, again, was that, looks like slapped together a speech the president gave. And then on the other important issue of tax reform, if you're going to be pro-business, pro-jobs, this country desperately needs tax reform. I heard about it, speeches, comments, interviews like every month, 3 months, 4 months. You know what? That is nowhere on the agenda now. In fact, we have a president who's talking about raising corporate taxes.
Larry,
yes, but
I have information for you.
Jared, it's been 2 years on this conversation of business tax reform. I have some information for you here. And all right, tell me that they're actually going to put it out tomorrow. Tell me they're going to put it out next week. I've been waiting for this business tax reform plan, and I've been waiting for a spending cut plan from the White House. They will not publish a specific spending cut plan, Jared. You know that to be true. You know that to be true,
Jared. On corporate... Now, listen, you've got some points. On corporate tax reform, I guarantee you that before Treasury Secretary Geithner leaves, and I have no idea when he's leaving, there will be a proposal from the White House on corporate tax reform, and it's a really smart proposal. I think you're going to see that in coming weeks.
We saw it from the president, which was raise taxes.
Secondly, on spending, I think this White House has an excellent record. A 5-year discretionary spending freeze, 5 years. No one's ever done anything like that.
For a couple of $100 billion. And if come on, buddy. Jared, you're too...
That's real money.
And they wouldn't touch Medicare. All they did was demagogue the Medicare cuts, the Medicare restructuring from Congressman Paul Ryan. Ed Royce, Jared Bernstein is a good man. Jared Bernstein is a good analyst. But Ed Royce, I'm not hearing the real Jared Bernstein tonight. Ed, where are these specifics on spending cuts? Just regarding this debt ceiling debate. I don't see any specifics from the White House, Ed.
No, it's, you know, to quote Harry Reid, there's nothing left to cut. That's how he begins the discussion. Now we have discussions with the Senate, and the Senate is actually talking about increasing spending. Our problem here is that we continually expand the public sector at the expense of the private sector. And this has had profound consequences,
Congressman,
both in terms of the way the markets react
Larry, let me speak.
and on unemployment.
Let me speak, Larry.
No, David,
this is just wrong. I cannot let this go on. The fact of the matter is,
Royce,
this president
can you finish your statement,
more.
please? I want you to finish your statement, and then I will let David Goodman
I am not wrong in terms of the ratcheting up of spending. If you look at what's been done with the enactment of a new entitlement package on health care, which we cannot afford with the taxes
CBO
that
says
comes
it saves
with
money.
If you look at what's been done with the ratcheting up under the administration of all of these appropriations bills, with every government agency and department increasing its size, increasing the number of government dependents or employees that we're going to have to pay for, and then you add on top of all of that the consequences of the stimulus bill, which we're having a hard time convincing them to ratchet those expenditures back down. We just keep ratcheting up the pace.
I promised David Goodfriend. I promised Mr. Goodfriend a response. Now, please,
okay,
David.
go, David.
First of all, it's very interesting to note, isn't it, that in all this discussion from our Republican friends about cuts, we don't hear anything about the bloated $600 billion defense budget. Now, do we? And that is number one pork that we ought to cut out of this budget. Now, number two. No, you're wrong, Larry. You're wrong. Look at the budget that was. Look at the appropriation that was just passed out of the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives that Mr. Royce voted for increased the military budget. What a waste.
Well, now, number two.
Talk about the David, talk about
This is now the second time that President Obama has said, in order to grow this economy with innovation, we need to be able to have a patent bill. We don't have that out of the Republican House. We need to be able to have an innovation agenda. It's shot down every time the Republicans.
No, you do have that out of the House.
That is where you find growth. That is where you get tax revenue.
We've got 7 different pro-jobs bills over in the Senate that we've passed to the Senate, including, by the way, the patent bill that you're talking about, that have not been taken up by the Senate.
Jimmy Petticoat,
so this is a misrepresentation.
Can I raise another problem? Hold on a second. Jimmy Petticoat, what about Geithner on the dollar? I blame him for the falling dollar. It may have been Bernanke's money creation, but it's the Treasury Department that has the play on the exchange rate, and our exchange rate has gone to hell in a handbasket, Jimmy P. I blame that on Mr. Geithner.
No, because this administration believes that that the dollar needs to weaken to boost economic growth. I mean, that is part of their trade agenda, to have a weaker dollar. So you're absolutely right. When he's talked about a strong dollar, it just hasn't been credible.
Is that Jared deliberately done? Was that part of administration policy to depreciate the dollar, which I might add has backfired with high inflation and caused the economy to sputter, Jared? Did you backfire on that policy?
Not a bit, Larry. In fact, if anything, it has helped on the manufacturing side, and inflation is quiescent. Look,
that's my
point.
point.
Want to correct
they believe it. Jared just said it.
Please. One, I want to correct a very important big factual mistake with respect that the congressman made when he said that the Health Care Act increases the deficit. In fact, according to CBO, and that's the scorecard that we all have to believe, it lowers the budget deficit by $250 billion
Not
this
if you
decade,
take it out
and over $1 trillion next
into the out years.
So
You know that. If you look at the long haul, that new entitlement clearly increases the deficit.
Let the congressman respond. You made your point. Go ahead, Ed Royce. What's your response to that?
The obvious fact is that when you phase in the implementation of the program, but the taxes go into effect on the short term, for the short term, you can argue that it's not going to compound the problem, but no one can argue that once the plan is implemented with the full entitlements and all the subsidies, that we aren't drastically increasing the deficit. And that's why when you look into the out years, there's such a problem.
By the way, I want to add to that.
The second decade of the plan is saving over $1 trillion. Well, I'm sorry, but you can't get away from that.
I can't get away from it because the McKinsey study shows that twice as many people are going to go into the public health care, as much as 75 million people.
But it does,
I know the White House trashed it,
contradict
but
the point I made about the CBO.
$1 trillion. But
Jared likes the CBO. Jared likes the CBO. I'll give you the CBO number.
I like Jared Bernstein very much. I like David Goodfriend very much. Congressman,
we love you, Larry.
You're great to help us out. And Jimmy Petticoat, as always, very interesting discussion.